To most people, the stories that litter the graveyards of these mountain village homes are ones of poverty and depression. To many, the Welsh miner was a man who, when he worked, sang his way home from the pit. And when he had nothing better to do, marched to London. But there's more to it than that. For hidden here is an unwritten story of civil war and 12 long years of terror.
They're coming, then?
Yes. I knew they would.
Tell them you stopped working. Tell them you won't go down, please, for my sake.
I couldn't do that. If I didn't work, you and the boys would starve.
You know that's not true. Their children starve as well. All they're asking is for fair play. A man has a right to strike, hasn't he? Go out and tell them they're only workers like yourself.
Like me? Don't you understand, woman? They're Bolsheviks. Bloody Reds.
Communists. Is that all you're afraid of?
All right, I'll come. But leave my wife out of it.
We've got no argument with her, Jones. Only with blacklegs.
Come out and take your medicine like a man.
Aye, you are one.
Is he dead?
No, not dead.
It's in the evening after dark when the blackleg miner creeps to work with his moleskin pants and a t-shirt. There goes a blackleg miner.
It all began in 1926. The general strike was over. The leaders returned to the valleys and said, prepare for the struggle. They said the Russians had sent money. The kitchens will stay open. They said the children will not starve. But the valleys knew they had made a mistake. In 26, a new spirit was awake. For in these valleys at the turn of the century was born a breed of men who began to think strongly and act strongly. Out of these gray-green hills, a new man came down, self-educated, with an eloquence and a humor that has since left its mark on the pages of history. In 1926, they were young men, and with the same vigor as they threw off the old religion, so they embraced the new one, socialism. They called their organization the Miners' Federation, And in 1926, it was the most powerful trade union this country had ever seen. Their one weapon was the right to strike. A weapon that in 1926 drove its members into even greater poverty. There's no doubting the severe disillusionment that spread over the working class after the general strike. And so it came about that a new enemy was born. The Scab Union. The union formed by George Spencer.
George Spencer? What's the matter with you? He's an our side man. He wouldn't let us down. There was a sob.
Well, he's been a gun and done it, all right. It's in the paper, man. You can't deny that. Read it for yourself. 40,000 have already gone back in England. So it says here, anyway. God, we're up against it now, boy. That's not all. Read the rest of it.
George Spencer, MP for Nottingham and leader of the newly formed Miners' Non-Political Industrial Trade Union, today signed a no-strike agreement with the Coal Owners Association in Nottingham. Mr. Spencer complained that the Miners' Federation was run by the communists and the country couldn't afford another strike. 40,000 men have already gone back to work.
Bloody scabs of hell.
Well, you know what he's gone and done, don't you? Miners' Non-Political Industrial Trade Union, my arse, a scab union it is.
Yeah.
He's gone and organised the scabs and the blacklegs into a legitimate trade union. There'll be trouble now, I'm telling you, boy.
Oh,
The men looked like being victimized or afraid of losing their jobs. They came to me to intervene on their behalf. It was undoubtedly through my intervention that they were taken on. If I should lose my job with a miners' movement or in Parliament, I should not regret it. In fact, I should regard it as the best day's work for these men I've ever done.
In 1926, a great deal of unity was established amongst the miners, and we recognized that the struggle had very, very heavy political overtones.
One of this breed of men is Dan Evans, who was an active federationist at the time.
And also fighting the whole of the establishment. And therefore, to us as miners, the struggle was something different from what had taken place hitherto. Towards the end of the strike, when the men were drifting back because of poverty and starvation, there was a great deal of demoralization that set in. And during that period, we found a new element in the situation. We had been accustomed to deal with the coal owners and the press in our previous struggles in the history of this industry. But on this occasion, we found that men from our own ranks had defected because of the poverty and the harsh suffering that they had endured during the 26th strike.
What's the statement, sir?
Well, we've done with politics in this trade union. The men are ready for it.
One of our complaints is that the Federation has never endeavored to get rid of the Bolsheviks, who are doing their utmost to wreck the organization.
But we've promised not to fight the Federation.
And we welcome Federation members. Why should working men be asked to make grave sacrifices for political objectives?
Now, the directors of several South Wales leading companies have made statements to the effect that if we can only get this union going in the right spirit of conciliation and leaving suspicion out of it, they, as a board, might consider the question of division of profits.
Who's asked to make the sacrifice? Not the leaders or the miners' agents, but the workers. They tell us to go on strike and grow fat on their fancy words. The communists control the Federation. Arthur Cook, Federation leader, he's a communist. He doesn't want conciliation. He takes his orders from Moscow.
But Arthur Cook and the Federation still commanded the support of the men.
I had heard that George Spencer was to have spoken here today, but that he changed his mind when he heard that Cook would be speaking. Well, let me tell you, as long as Arthur Cook is Secretary of the Federation, he will see to it that the rights of miners are upheld against everyone, everywhere. And I warn the Labour Party. It will not get a penny of the miners' money if it is not prepared to give it support in time of crisis.
The Reds fight dirty, and we must fight to get the union back into the hands of the sane men. If the market is to be kept, we must not have another strike. Politicians are interfering with industrial life.
The agreement made by Spencer is one we're all ashamed of. Yeah. The coal owners based their terms for the whole coalfield on his agreement. His union was born in a colliery office and supported with Tory beer and fed in the Tory clubs. And you mark my words, when the employers withdraw their support, it will die.
I call attention to rumours that we are paid by the coal owners and the Seamen's Union. The latter have helped us, but we have not received 1 penny from the coal owners.
Beware of those people who let you down in the great stoppage, who now are trying to create a division and split in the movement. When we the workers, find that they, the coal owners, ship owners, railway magnates, the landed gentry and others, have nothing to do with politics, then we will begin to disregard politics ourselves.
Last to go back after the general strike, the Welsh were now the weakest. What little energy remained was used to hound the communists from the trade union and labor movements. Throughout 1928, the Scab Union set about this task. The founder members of the union were sacked by the new recruits, many of them disappointed Federation leaders seeking office themselves. And out of this revision emerged a new General Secretary, William Gregory, himself a former Federation official and a miner for 40 years. His son remembers the part he played.
Taking my mind back over all those years, I think that he was utterly fed up with the antics, if I can call it antics, of the Miners' Federation at that time. There was a big infiltration of communists into the Miners' Federation, who were trying to run the Federation, who were doing more harm to the mining industry than they were doing good. And he was the type of person that wouldn't stand by to see such things happen.
All right, thank you very much.
As with the coal owners, the new union retained full support of the Tory-owned press, so that reports in both local and national newspapers were slanted in such a way to make the Miners' Federation appear unreasonable in its demands. But when the pit at 9 Mile Point was reopened by Scab Union Labour, the opinions of Lewis, the colliery manager, were given full coverage.
I tried to approach the Federation agent, but I was unable to contact him. I was then approached by a number of miners who wanted work. I pointed out to them that as much as I would like to, I could not reopen the pit with a handful of men. Now, these men returned the next day with a list of 53 men of the local Miners' Industrial Union who were prepared to return to work at once. As these men were pioneers in a demand to go back to work, it was inevitable that negotiation should begin with them and the Ocean Coal Company. My only concern was to get the pit reopened. I didn't care who negotiated with us.
This again caused a violent clash at the colliery between Federationists and Scabs. And after 4 days, the attempt failed, and the pit again closed down. But once set in motion, tempers were not easily restrained, nor were they confined to the miners in Wales.
Is it not a fact that in South Wales several mines are ready to open and need 2,000 colliers and cannot get them?
Colonel Berry has insulted not only the miner, but the heir to the throne as well.
May I say it was in yesterday's newspaper?
It's a lie.
Kindly do not interrupt.
If you don't make him withdraw it, you will never make me withdraw anything. I will defy you.
I might tell the honourable gentleman I was only quoting what was in yesterday's newspapers.
Since when has it become cause for a quarrel between parties, for statements to be made about which two opinions may exist?
Why don't you control the Chancellor?
Be quiet.
The rioting at 9 Mile Point had reached the House of Commons through the newspapers. But Aneurin Bevan, champion of the miners, was able to relate the story at first hand.
All I saw was a bit of turf thrown by a 7-year-old girl. Immediately came the order, go for the bastards. It came from Superintendent Spenlev, and I'm confident that this was prearranged. The charge was callous, brutal, premeditated, and it ought never to have been made. I hope it's not true that the police were drunk or doped. We must have the police duties administered in a better manner than at 9 Mile Point. The sort of thing is brewing that will bring more than a smile to the faces of the Standing Joint Committee.
In 1929, the tactics of the Scab Union changed. This time, there would be no rioting. New methods of persuasion were introduced. The nerve of the community was being stretched. The war of the well-chosen word had begun. Well backed with money, the Scab Union could afford to bide its time. They did their job well. They chose the words. Poverty and resentment would do the rest.
Mothers, wives, are your men in the new union?
Do not stand by and watch as your near and dear starve.
Return to work now and live in relative comfort.
Do you require more time in which to starve?
The Federation are your bosses, not your servants.
More has been got for the worker in 2.5 years of cooperation than in 25 years of strike.
Who will suffer? Not the miners' agents, but your wives and your children. They are pawns in the hands of these incompetent leaders.
We will not recognize May Day, but resolve to recognize Empire Day as the annual holiday.
The appeal of Mosley's party was put in Empire first. We attended a big meeting in the Empire in Queen Street in Cardiff when Mosley and Lady Cynthia Mosley put the views of their new party to a very big audience, and the theme of their speech was that they wanted to put the Empire first, that there was such an infiltration of other political parties in this country that to the detriment of the country, that Mosley then, who was in his prime, wanted to start this party on an empire basis. And I think at that time that there were very many cabinet ministers in government that were already in the party.
Members of Parliament were involved. And we found that the members of Parliament were connected with the Cliveden set. Lady Astor used to be the head, I think, of the Cliveden set.
Bill Cruz was a Federation official at that time.
And they met quite a number of people from all over the world, including Ribbentrop. And in fact, the Nazis were involved. And it did appear that there was a link between company unionism in South Wales and the Cliveden set, Ribbentrop, and the Nazi regime.
Whilst the battle of words and political ideology was taking place, a brutal human battle was being fought in the pits, and the Federationists were able to keep control in some areas, whilst the Scabs were inching themselves into other pits. But one steam coal lodge stood out as stronger than the others, Bedworth's. The men asked for one thing, fair play, and they were prepared to fight for it. After a series of lockouts, the coal owners turned for protection to the law, and 30 members of the Bedworth Lodge were hauled before the Chancery Division of the High Court. This had followed a show cards.
If learned counsel would kindly explain to me the meaning of show cards, I should be most grateful.
The object of show cards, my lad, is to discover how many men were working at the colliery.
And to coerce men into joining the Federation.
Are you aware that some of the men had the impression that the colliery manager and Mr. Thomas Jones were trying to get Scab Unionists underground?
I don't know what the impression was.
Very well, let me put it to you another way. It is known to you, is it not, that some of the men in the mines had stopped work where Scab Unionists had been employed?
I know of cases, and other cases of the most peaceful mines in South Wales where no Federationist is
Now
employed.
you must be very careful what you're saying here. You see, that's almost actionable. The point is, you were afraid of what the 300 or 400 men might do to you.
So would you have been. The manager came out, I tried to push in, but the pickets pushed against me with all their might. My crutches fell away. At the time, I was a member of the Federation. 17 and sixpence in arrears. On the 27th, I paid up 12 shillings and was allowed to work. On Friday, I got past the pickets by pretending I'd show my card after I clocked in. On the way home, I was pulled off my bike and made to pay my arrears.
But there was no violence offered to you.
No. Obscene language and a lot of threats.
Yes, and most of them came from yourself.
No man who works at Bedworth Colliery would say he didn't use bad words.
would seem that South Wales is a veritable Garden of Eden, where no man would lift his hand against the other. And then, from time to time, the facts emerge. A man has to get police protection to enable him to get to his home, which might produce the impression that South Wales is a place where people think strongly and act strongly. Again, what kind of industry is it? Which seems to corrode everything it touches, which wipes out the beauty of nature and leaves desolation behind. An industry which brings heartbreak, death, and necessity to the homes of the miners. It even seems to affect the employers and makes them the most difficult in any industry. So seriously do the colliery take these happenings that they felt compelled to seek protection of the High Court, to seek a judgment so authoritative as to dispose of finally the claims of the trades unions to invade their premises. But apology does not end the matter. This type of thing has to stop, and it is almost certain that in any future matter of this kind, those who break the injunction of this court will go to prison.
But none gave way. The men demanded a strike, but a strike was the last thing that the leaders wanted. Newly issued figures showed that the membership had dropped to half the 1926 numbers. The men were told to wait. Winter came, and again the management broke the agreement. The men could wait no longer. In February, they struck work and asked the Federation for £20,000 to help carry on the fight. This time, the leaders agreed. Ness Edwards, the miners' agent, promised the Bedworth men that the Federation was prepared to keep them out, if necessary, for 2 years. On the same day, under the direction of Superintendent Spendlove, 500 policemen were billeted in sheds at the pit head. No striker was allowed near the pit. The day after saw trainloads of blacklegs enter the village. Anyone who was prepared to work was taken on, and officials toured the surrounding valleys offering wages of £5 a week. The Federation, as a result, was forced to break its promise to the men at Bedworth. And it was Ness Edwards who had to break the news.
Well, the news I have is grave. To the men at Bedworth, who have struggled to keep the standards of the Federation alive against overwhelming oppression and opposition, the decision of this committee may appear an act of cowardice. Nevertheless, it is the will of the majority that notices bringing the entire coalfield out on strike in support of Bedworth be withdrawn.
Is Bedworth to be sacrificed? So we must fight alone. Come on, answer it, man.
Gentlemen, I am more than sorry for what this decision will mean to you and your children. You will choose to starve before you lose your self-respect, I know that.
That's right.
But remember this, I want you to remember this. The principles of democracy on which this federation have been built is greater and stronger than the will of each of us alone. I want you to remember that. It is hoped that the other side will show some reciprocity in order that a peaceful solution can be discovered. Well, there's nothing more I can tell you at the moment.
But the solution was far from peaceful, as Mrs. Ludlow and Jack Roberts, young people at the time, soon found out.
The day of the riots, we turned out, midday it was, and we turned out. The night before, the local policeman, who happened, we know him very well, he warned us about it, and he tried on more than one occasion to stop us going out, and he asked us in quite a polite way not to go out the next day. Of course, the police were there on horsebacks. Well, we turned out as usual, and there was a bigger crowd than ever out with us.
The women were arrested. I think there were some stones flying about on this corner before they came to the main road. I caught up with the superintendent, Spendlove, and told him that he was a damn fool for arresting the women then, that he was only asking for trouble, that it would be much easier for him to have charged the women later on and let them get back to their homes as it was. But he wouldn't listen, and up we went. Going up towards the workman's hall, there were lots of men then running on the side, picking up stones, and some stones were being thrown, and eventually got up by the council office.
There were 6 of us then, policemen on each side, and they marched us up to Bedworth, up here to the police station, and they charged us.
A crowd gathered outside the police station, and Superintendent Spendlove called on a local magistrate to read the Riot Act.
Silence! Silence! Our sovereign the king chargeth and commandeth all persons being assembled immediately to disperse themselves and peaceably to depart to their habitations or to their lawful businesses, upon the pains contained in the act made in the 1st year of King George I for preventing tumults and riotous assemblies. God save the king.
After the riot, the air of defeat spread over the village. Occasionally, a scab who had worked late or missed his police escort would be found alone. When he was caught, he was tarred and feathered. For 6 weeks, the ritual continued. But the end was near. The Federation insisted that the men must go back to work. A meeting was again called in the workmen's hall.
For 6 weeks you have fought without success. The pit is still working. On our own, we cannot hope to force the owners to give in. They make bigger profits with the scabs, and can you blame them? The position is hopeless. Gentlemen, the position is hopeless. You must go back to work on the company's terms.
Mr. Edwards, a man needs more than food to live. He needs to live with his conscience. Now you tell us to go back to work. Why?
Well, the executive committee of the Federation have agreed.
Why? We struck for justice. Now you let us down.
Communists?
Communists. Always, it's the communists. I'm not a communist. I've never been one, never will be. My friend, Bill Nind, he's a communist. When I die, he will have my clothes, because he is my friend. When you die, Mr. Edwards, who's going to have your clothes? You have no friends in Bedworth now. You shouldn't fear the communists, but your own cowardice and your own ambition. No, I'm a bit too harsh on you, Ness. You're a brave man to believe in democracy.
more than you trust your friends. Come on, boys. Let's go home, let the women cool our tempers. We won't win this fight with our present leaders.
For 2 months, the men came back day after day, week in, week out, in all weathers, to receive the same answer. Many left to look for work elsewhere, in London, in Kent, and in the drifts of the Forest of Dean. Others turned their backs on their country forever. But for the majority, there was no choice but to remain, their spirit broken.
There's no work.
William Davis.
There's no work.
Thomas Griffith.
The pit can work without you. Why don't you go home?
Mrs. Ludlow spent this period in prison for taking part in the riot.
The only regret I ever had was being parted from my little boy and my husband. But to counteract that, my husband used to bring him down, and by me standing on the chair in the cell and looking up, climbing on the back of this chair and looking through the window, I could see them out on the road. And he used to put Alan, the little boy, to walk across the road. Of course, the boy didn't know what he was doing it for, but I think he must have had some idea. But as long as I could see them on a Saturday, it was something to live for.
Many men, however, had little to live for. After Bedworth, the miner began to ask, could he trust the Federation? He could suffer the economic defeat of 1926. He could suffer the political reversal of 1931. But the moral, cowardly surrender of 1933, that was another question. Had the Federation not changed its leadership at the end of 1933, it seems likely that it would have disappeared as a trade union force. Then in January 1934, James Griffiths became the new president of the South Wales Miners' Federation. Known as Preacher Jim to the miners, he took the opportunity to enthuse a new vigor into the dimmed wits of the coalfield. But like his second-in-command, Arthur Jenkins, he was plagued by the memory of the general strike. And it was this pervading fear that inspired the policies of the Federation over the next 2 years. In June 1934, the Scab Union stepped up its campaign to win over 2 more Federation lodges, at the Emlyn Colliery, Carmarthen, and at the Park Pit, Coombe Park. In both pits, Federation men had been replaced by Unionists, and a stoppage had occurred. Feelings had come to a head because the Coal Owners Association had refused to discuss the proposed wage agreement due for renewal in September. Instead, they had decided to go on holiday, much to the annoyance of a leading coal exporter, who declared,
The whole point is this. What would the nation have said if in September 1914 the leaders had decided to go on holiday? So often I've been caught in the coils of coal strikes. Strikes which could have been avoided if the coal owners had not chosen to fight on a might is right attitude.
We seek methods to avoid faction and dissent. Our desire is for high employment with a strong federation whose leaders have the courage to face facts.
The facts, Gwelwch Gwir. What facts? It is more than a coincidence that the Scab Union have chosen to act at this crucial hour, and it's a greater coincidence that the coal owners have decided to take a holiday.
Yes, but with winter approaching, Griffiths won't dare call another strike.
He's a moderate, he won't fight.
The rank and file will fight. Their numbers are increasing. Horner's seen to that, and he'll fight.
Arthur Horner is a communist.
And a very clever one. In fact, if he gets the power, there's a man we need to watch. But he's a communist, and the socialists spend more time chasing him than chasing our profits.
Taff Merthyr had been the scene of the most bitter conflict. Set between the villages of Bedlinog and Trelewis, the Scab Union had kept control during the 26th strike, and since then, the reign of terror had gone on.
The
Federation has resorted to tactics which make its name stink. Boycotting, physical violence, starvation, and the ruin of thousands of working men and local tradesmen. A record never to be proud of. One man who continued to work as a daughter, a teacher. While she was returning from her duty, she was spat upon and called such names as would disgrace anyone with a sense of decency. Would Messrs. Arthur Horner, James Griffiths, Oliver Harris tolerate such treatment of their daughters? Certain Federationists have threatened to kill a unionist pig. Gangs of youths beat up union men. Communism, under the direction of Arthur Horner, is responsible for this campaign. We demand the support of every true-thinking British subject to fight this menace.
It wasn't long before the people were marching, not on London, not on the colliery, but on the Federation offices in Cardiff. And then, on the 1st of February 1935, the industrial unions settled the matter under the noses of their opponents. They organized a secret ballot. Naturally, they won. Democracy had settled the matter, and there was no way around it. So after a battle lasting 6 months, the men were back where they started. Without work, without a future, they remained deep in no man's land. By October 35, membership of the Industrial Union had reached a peak. At 9 Mile Point, the scene of the first battle, 90 miners had got jobs in the pit. But local Federationists had read in a newspaper of Romanian miners who locked themselves in the pits to protest against bad conditions. So, with a view that what was good for the Romanians was good for the Welsh, the men at 9 Mile Point took the law into their own hands. And so, on Saturday, October the 12th, 1935, 140 men in the west pit of the colliery refused to come up the pit. The stay-down strike had begun. A new chapter in the history of protest was being written. The new weapon allowed the men to strike and retain control. For as long as they remained underground, the scabs could not enter the pit. After 5 days, they sent the young boys up, but refused to come up themselves, despite assurances from Jim Griffiths that the management had accepted their terms. The truth was, they no longer trusted the leaders, who, in their view, had acted too weakly too often in the past. But James Griffiths didn't view the situation from a distance. He decided to see the men. He describes the encounter in his book, Pages from Memory.
It was a fine Saturday morning when Arthur Jenkins and I made our way to the glen. And when we reached the colliery, thousands of men, women, and children had assembled on the hillside, with hundreds of police to keep them company. The scene at the pit bottom that day remains vivid in my memory. The 9 days below had left their mark. The elderly looked weary. The young had grown beards. I was greeted by the patriarch, who opened and closed each day with prayer, and in between had transformed the stay-down strikers into a choir. The leader escorted me to a platform, an upturned tub, and called for order. They listened to me intently as I explained the terms of the settlement, and plied me with questions. Then the leader announced that a vote would be taken for or against the acceptance of our president's recommendation.
Down with your lamps, he cried, and now all in favor, lift your lamp up and hold it while I count.
It was one of the proudest moments of my life when every lamp was raised. We sang Bread of Heaven. This was the bread they could not deny us. Then in good order, the older men first, they ascended the shaft to the sunshine and home.
Well, when Jim Griffiths was elected as the MP for Llanelli, efforts were made at that time to combine the
his duties in Parliament with the presidency of the South Wales Miners. But the rank and file executive told Mr. Griffiths that if he stood for the membership of Parliament, well, then he would have to relinquish, and when he was elected, he'd have to relinquish his position as president, because we did not believe that any person could hold those two posts successfully. And as a result of that, Horner had the opportunity of becoming elected to the presidency of the South Wales Miners. At that time, most of the old leadership felt that Horner's election to the presidency of this union would be tantamount to the destruction of the union. They felt that there was a firebrand coming into control of the union, and that would mean the end of the union as far as the Federation was concerned. But Horner took this post and worked in it as a scientific person.
The irony ran deep. With the election of Horner, the wheels had turned full circle. Born to destroy the communists, the Scabs had compelled the Federation into choosing one to save itself. And pacifist or not, Horner, the seasoned traveler of the Soviet states, knew better than the socialists that war was coming. He used his knowledge well. Arthur Horner's first task was to win back Bedworth to the Federation, and he directed an underground operation for this purpose. So, with Hitler and Mussolini raging around the corner, the promised strike in this far-off village had taken on cabinet proportions. For a week, Captain Cruikshank, the Secretary for Mines, called Instone, then Horner, Gregory, and Spencer back and forth to his office. It was there on September the 4th, after Instone had given his final refusal and left London for Devon, that Cruikshank heard the news. The men at Bedworth had refused to come up the pit. Once they got the message, the owners had no hesitancy in deciding that the sacrifices of Sir Samuel and the Industrial Union was in the national interest if a coalfield stoppage was the alternative. And like the owners, the Western Mail made it quietly known that the Union and the Imperialist League were eloquent luxuries the country could ill afford in times of international crisis. Then, on the 2nd of October, Horner announced the date of the ballot. But as dramatic and historical as that occasion turned out to be, he took the opportunity of announcing a few days later that for the first time in its history, the Federation had agreed to sign a no-strike contract with the Bedworth Company. The agreement to guarantee peace for 5 years. As anxious as the Unionists were to take the credit, the ballot declared on October the 30th finally settled the matter. Out of the 1,500 votes cast, the Federation obtained 1,177, and the Union, 308. The last chapter in the history of the non-political Union was written a year later. By this time, the no-strike agreement had been settled on the entire coalfield, and then in May 1937, Spencer's Union in Nottingham was amalgamated with the Federation. It had been the fear of a greater war that had made Arthur Cook's prediction come true, that the Union would last for as long as the coal owners chose to let it. And with precedent already set, it was merely words away before the South Wales Miners' Federation agreed to amalgamation with the Industrial Union. And this was agreed on February the 21st, 1938. Horner sealed the whole episode by buying off the leaders of the Scab Union. Like Spencer, who had regained his 1926 position as president of the Nottingham Miners Association, together with a higher salary than the Federation's national president, Gregory, too, was given a pension. He now retired to form the Conservative Workmen's Association.
Yes, well, I already told you.
I didn't pick that up at first.
Yes, Mr. Horner? Yes, well, as long as we...
And so, after 12 long years, the non-political union was laid to rest. Today, the Federation, too, has disappeared. And curiously enough, caressed by the rising tide of historical efficiency, it has become a union and a closed shop. But the men have chosen it. It is the will of the majority. The men have their dues deducted by their employers and do not complain. The union official is no longer a worker, but a manager with a suit and a salary in keeping with his newly found status. Will Painter, who later became president of the National Union of Mine Workers, was blooded into the trade union movement during this period and was very much aware of the conditions at that time.
I think the early part of the century really produced a breed of man that must be described as giants in the trade union movement. And one has to examine the environment that existed, especially in the mining industry, where the struggle around wages and hours of employment, the agitation that went on, for instance, before we had an 8-hour day on a 6-day week in the coal mining industry, the struggles that took place even during the First World War, and of course the employers. I would regard the South Wales coal owners as being about the toughest bunch of employers anywhere in British industry. It was a period characterized by terrific struggles, by discussion and ferment around changing society fundamentally, socialism versus capitalism, the class struggle being so naked and brutal in its character. And this threw up leaders of a different caliber to, I think, what will be thrown up in this period, in the post-war period.
Today, many former scab unionists remain the pillars of church-going respectability. Only their sparsely attended funerals distinguish them from the crowd. Many older men would say that to succeed, the modern unions have learned to act like the coal owners. And to the miner, whose life remains short and uncomfortable, who is still expected to survive on a pension of £1 a week, the argument rings true. And today, as we watch our fathers wither away, we might begin to remember the wars they fought, the tales they told to us as children on their knees, the tales we often choose to forget. For most of them, it all began in 26.
It's in the evening after dark when the black-leg miner creeps to work. With his moleskin pants and a t-shirt, there goes a black-leg miner. He takes his picks and down he goes to haul the coal that lies below. But there's not a woman in this town or road who look at the black-leg miner. Oh, don't go near Taffamother mine. Across the way they stretch a line to catch the throat and break the spine of a dirty black-leg miner. Oh, Bedwas is a terrible place. They rub wet tar in the black-leg's face, and round the heap they run a foot race to catch the black-leg miner.